on Junkies, welcome to this review of The Surfer, the new film starring Nick Cage, directed by Lorcan Finnegan, who is actually an Irish filmmaker who also made a film called Vivarium back in 2019. Now, as is the way with Nick Cage at the moment, any film in which he appears generally is a sort of, it's almost like a bottled at source cult classic, or tries to be. Not all of them are successful. He's had films like Mandy, he's had films like The Pig, Colour Out of Space, Dream Scenario, and then there've been a couple in there which haven't worked quite so well. He's really in a renaissance in his career. He's really at a sort of epicenter of just brilliance, and as soon as he's hired, it's a kind of guarantee, or as soon as you know he's in a film, it's a guarantee that you know this film is going to be pretty much non-narrative, weird, and have a lot of hallucinogenic shit kicking off at some point in it. I don't think this necessarily speaks to whether Nick Cage himself is off his tits all the time, but most of the films he's in are off their tits. So this is The Surfer. I went into this hesitantly. The trailer, the posters, sort of a sun-baked, blanched kind of style and look and feel to it. Set in Australia, Nick Cage plays a surfer who's returning to his hometown in order to buy a home on the seafront for his son. He arrives with his son. And in so doing, without giving away the sort of literally the nuts and bolts of the entire plot, he meets a resistant group of surfers on the beach who push back against him and kind of say to him, threaten him in no uncertain terms. It's Christmas as well. You've got a surfer with a kind of Christmas hat on, a Santa hat on, and they kind of threaten Nick Cage and his son and say, no, you're not allowed on this beach. You're not a local. And so at first I thought, oh my God, is this going to be a film about people buying second homes, or about city folk trying to kind of, gentrify coastal resorts like Cornwall? I thought, well, are we going to get a sort of Cornish narrative here, but set in Australia? This ends up becoming something much more outlandish, bizarre, surreal, discomforting, and poetic at the same time. Just to give you a pause, in terms of, although he's not an Australian filmmaker, this is very much an Australian film. Most of the cast are Australian, the landscape is very Australian, the sea, the surf, the sun, the colours, the animals, the kookaburras, the kind of porcupines. I think we even have a shot of a kangaroo at one point. And immediately, with the kind of cicadas and the hiss and that yellow kind of tint to virtually everything, I was really getting riffs on things like Walkabout, or that film Outback, the one with Donald Pleasance with the kangaroos. In fact, I think it was called Wake in Fright. I think that's what it was called. Quite an astonishing scene in that film, Wake in Fright, starring Donald Pleasance. It was made in about 1971. Walkabout was around the same time, Jenny Agutter. Real sun-baked surrealism. A sort of songlines, kind of weird, kind of haunting from the land. I mean, if you think about it, even the Mad Max series of films exploit that idea that blood has been spilt on into the sand, into the cracked grounds, the soil of Australia, and perhaps that's what leads to the haunting. Anyway, so this is a very odd film, and if I'm really honest, I'm not entirely certain it works in its entirety, but then I can't think of a Nick Cage film in recent years that you could in any way, shape or form say, oh yes, it worked entirely. I mean, Mandy has become a cult classic, but there were many moments in that were overcooked, overwrought, overbearing, lasted too long, and then there were just moments of sheer gonzo madness and stupidity that just left you kind of aghast, agog, and just full of respect for the kind of weird, whacked out style of the film. So this has moments like that. It's a slow build, and what's weird about it, although it's called The Surfer, although it's set, yes, on a beach, this is actually a film set in a car park by a beach. I think we've all been in them, we've all pulled up at sort of car parks like this in Cornwall, or when we're on holiday and you're trying to pay on the app and there's a kind of shitty little kind of cafe, and I'm thinking of Canberra Sands and places like that. So he's parked up and he's there. So basically he's visited right at the beginning with his son. His son's got a bit icky, kind of, oh no, Dad, they don't want us to go down. It's very threatening. They're very violent. So he goes away, and then he comes back on his own, Nick Cage, and he's still trying on the blower to kind of negotiate with his kind of fund manager to kind of negotiate more money in order to purchase this house that he really wants to get, because he grew up here. It'd be like me going back to Nanny Thelma's in Muddyford and going, I want that house on Sandpit or in Poole, because this is where I grew up, or this is where where I was born. But what precedes is a film and a story that doesn't allow you to easily define what it's about. This could be, in equal measures, a film about a man who's kind of at that point, like in Dream Scenario, is at an age and at a point where he's not respected by his kids. The mainstay of his life is over. He's done that thing which most old people do, or older people do, which is a sort of nostalgic tug to where you grew up. A bit like the salmon that kind of go all the way back up the river or up the stream to kind of lay their eggs where they were born. You know, that strange thing and especially men, you know, it's also a surfing and being young and on the beach and a young man full of kind of, you know, the ability to catch the wave and all that kind of stuff. You know, he talks at the beginning, he's talking to his son poetically about the majesty and the danger and the magic of waves and catching a surf and all that. So, you know, there's a part of this feels like this is a sort of a poem. It's a poetic film, even though it's very violent, aggressive. And although it's violent and aggressive, it's just an incredibly disorientating film. But it's not entirely unlikable for that. I mean, it's, you know, in some hands, the amount of kind of jump cutting around and trying to piece together who is Nick Cage, why has he lost that, why are they all being like this with him, is it real, is he imagining it, is it hallucinatory, is this a doppelganger situation, is he also, is his alter ego the kind of homeless guy who lives in the dirty, smashed up car in the car park? Are we meant to draw parallels between Nick Cage as he becomes increasingly homeless? Because what happens is he gets stranded in the car park, his battery dies, then his mobile phone charger goes, and then he kind of trades in or hands the guy at the cafe his watch as kind of collateral in order to charge his phone, and then the guy shuts the kind of the cafe shop down, and then he gets a phone call to come in to the local kind of, you know, public phone box, but the local kind of surfing dudes have cut the receiver off, so he can't even speak to, you know. At times this is almost like that Martin Scorsese film After Hours, but set not necessarily on a beach, but in a car park by the beach. It's so weird. And then meanwhile, you've got this bum, they call him a bum, but he's kind of like a homeless guy who's in a worse predicament than Nick Cage. And then really across the arc of the film, Nick Cage's situation gets worse and worse, more and more degraded. He doesn't have his shoes. His surfing board has been nicked and disappeared. His car has been graffitied on. He goes into, you know, where the drinking fountain is. Someone's put a kind of a poo bag with dog shit on it all over it. So he has to go and try and get water from a sink that says don't use the water. You know, it's incredibly dirty. It's incredibly horrible. He's reduced down to a kind of essence of man in just his suit, and he's got coffee all down him because he's been assaulted. Every now and then he tries to go down onto the beach to kind of get his surfboard back off these hoodlums, off this gang of youths. But here's the other part of the film that I think is quite interesting. There's a kind of religious aspect to it too. You've kind of almost got these disciples on the beach, helped by the fact that they all look like Jesus. They've all got bleached, well, no, Jesus hasn't got bleached blonde hair, but they all look like sort of hippies. They look like religious hippies. So you've kind of got almost a religiosity to this gang, and you've seen this kind of burning of kind of this, the searing of kind of branding of someone sort of through, you know, Nick Cage has seen that through the kind of rafters of their hut on the beach. So they've all got these kind of marks, these scars of waves. And then there's another sequence of someone being almost baptized in the sea. So there's a kind of almost an initiation ceremony type thing for this gang that's on the beach. And then you've got Nick Cage being stripped back of all of his worldly goods, so that he's having to kind of almost, it's penance. He's entering penury. He's literally being reduced down to, you know, he's even where the thorns of the kind of, you know, the crown of thorns that Jesus wore, making his forehead bleed. He's bleeding at the head. He steps in glass. He's starving. He considers eating a rat. He starts eating fresh eggs from nests and stuff like that. He finds food and sustenance in the wildlife around him. So there's a religious aspect to it too. And then there's also a kind of suicidal aspect to it, where, you know, it's referenced that his father perhaps killed himself on the beach. His body was found in the waves. The head of the gang kind of taunts him and teases him about this. So I wouldn't be at all surprised. I haven't done any biblical studies in recent months, even though we've got a new pope, so maybe I should have done. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if you went through this with a kind of, you know, with a sort of, you know, with a ruler and a pencil, that you wouldn't find that almost every moment of Jesus's journey is paralleled by Nick Cage's kind of slow insanity and degradation of hope that goes on in a car park. I mean, I feel like I really intimately know the car park in which he's parked. At one point, you've almost got the Mary Magdalene moment, where a woman traveller who's a photographer, she's the one who takes a photograph of him next to his old car, because his old car disappears at one point. And even when he calls the police, he discovers that the police is part of this gang on the beach. So it's mucky, it's hot, it's sticky, it's weird. And yet it wasn't as weird as some of the other kind of Nick Cage films that I've seen in recent years. He actually keeps it quite straight. It's definitely a poem, it's definitely an allegory, it's definitely a metaphor. What exactly for, I don't really know. In parts, it really didn't work. There were sort of series or sequences that were just a bit clunky and a bit amateur and a bit ill thought through, and they didn't really progress things at all. There were scenes of violence that weren't particularly grisly or gruesome, but I have to say the film was very successful at just threading through a deep sense of unease, like something awful is about to happen. And whilst you've got this idea of him looking at himself, seeing himself in the bum or the tramp or the homeless guy in the car park, and then there's another point where he looks over at the house that he's wanting to buy, and he sees a silhouette of someone who looks like him, and then he looks down at the beach. This could be, and in its entirety, this is one of those films that does that thing that poems do, which means to whoever reads it, you can take from this film what you wish. And I think that's a huge tribute to this film, actually. Because yes, it's gonzo, yes, it's weird and whacked out, yes, it's a kind of horror of sorts or thriller of sorts, but it also allows you to throw into it or fill it with whatever meaning you want to give it. And for me, the meaning I think I ended up giving this film was of a man who had kind of passed his prime, was holding on to the vestiges of his youth, was wanting to share that sort of virility of youth, if you like, with his son, was emasculated. This is a film about a lot of toxic masculinity, and yet at the same time, it's not just toxic masculinity. It's a very clever film about how a sort of pseudo kind of mindfulness and kind of harnessing of the elements. The gang on the beach aren't just like, ugh. They're also kind of like, you've got to prove yourself, and in proving yourself, once you've proved yourself, we can all be really touchy-feely and we can all be part of the gang. So it was about male belonging. I think really this is a film about men who are lost, men who lose themselves at a certain point at my age, who get lost and are lonely and lose focus, and the horizon has kind of got further and further away, ambitions and dreams of catching a wave or catching a surf. Those were the dreams of when you were young. And in a way, this is about, Nick Cage, the older man, trying to recapture that. And part of him is, the mistake he makes is thinking he can recapture that by buying a house, by doing all the grown-up things of having a car and everything. But actually, this is a film that whittles him all the way down, gets rid of every single worldly good, every luxury, and strips him right down to just his board and just the moment, which is a really neat moment, the way the film ends, of him turning and looking as that enormous crashing wave is about to come in. This sits very much alongside Dream Scenario as a sort of male midlife crisis type film. In every single scene, poor old Nick Cage is hit, beaten, it deals with dog shit. It's barked at. There's a really sensational shot where this dog is just right next to him as he's sort of collapsed on the floor by the public toilets, and the dog is just barking. I don't know if it was in slow motion, but it felt like it was in slow motion. Incredibly atmospheric. There's a sort of exploitation grindhouse. There's a bit of a grindhouse sensibility to some of the tilts off into sun and zoom ins. Lots of active sort of handheld zooms, not automatic zooms. Well, some automatic zooms, and those zooms really give you that sort of walkabout, that Outback, the Donald Pleasance film I was talking about. They really give you that sort of sensibility of era, like it's of its time, and when the camera goes for something, it zooms in quite fast. It's quite a neat, dated, stylistic device, the kind of crash zoom, or the hurried zoom, the rush to zoom in to kind of home in on something. He's so parched at times, his face, that it just looks like it looks so brown and brittle and dry. There's a couple of close-ups of his mouth that's just so parched. It made me thirsty. I had to go and grab a Diet Coke straight afterwards. Brilliantly shot, interestingly edited, really quirky, really unsettling, surreal. There's huge surrealism in this, and the surrealism, what I like about it is it doesn't seek to then make sense of every surreal sort of dead end that you go down. I mean, it's a problem as a viewer, isn't it? We're always, as viewers, trying to make sense. Well, what does that mean, Dan? That means that. And I'm sure there'll be people under this review kind of going, well, no, what it meant was this. But actually, I like the fact that this left a lot of kind of, loose ends. It didn't tie up all the kind of bows and laces and make it all neat and kind of sewn up. It was philosophical. It was crazy. It was sunbaked. It was wild. It was set within a wilderness. There was a baking hot sun. You felt his thirst. You felt his hunger. But you also felt him finding something in himself. There was definitely a sort of religious purpose to his character. So all in all, it was kind of strange. And I'm a big believer that, some of the best films aren't films that work completely. And this is adventurous filmmaking. This is inventive filmmaking. This is experimental filmmaking. And I'm a huge advocate for anything that does that. So if I was to give this a score, I mean, it's crazy. It's unlike anything else you're going to see this year. It's deeply unsettling at times. Maybe not as funny as I was expecting it to be, but sometimes that can wear a bit thin with Nick Cage, just funny for funny's sake. He is odd. He delivers strange lines, or he delivers lines strangely. But I thought, again, in a weird way, this was a performance that sits a little bit alongside his performance in The Pig. The whole thing was whacked and weird in The Pig, but he was incredibly authentic at the centre, and I think he is incredibly authentic at the centre of this too. He's giving his performance seriousness, and even though there are odd moments where you go, that's Nick Cage, he doesn't overperform the Nick Cage. He doesn't out Nick Cage himself, which is quite an achievement when he's Nick Cage. So all in all, I would probably give this, I'd say definitely go and see it. It's if you bang on a massive joint, you're going to get so much more from it, I thought as well. I'd give this 83 out of 100.